Hi, I'm Yellow Sleeves, and this is part 2 in a 3-part mini-series in which I break down my song Meditate. In part 1, I talked about the writing process and the context around the song. I also talked a little bit about the different boxes I wanted to tick in terms of the genre and also in terms of the mood and the vibe of the song. And if that sounds like something you're interested in, I'm going to link the video somewhere on the screen. In part 2, I want to talk about the instruments I used, but also the recording gear, the sound selection, and the plugins, and I want to give you a little bit of insight into why I chose the different sounds that I chose. Despite it being a short song and the intro to my EP, and it's not a full-fledged song, Meditate is the simplest of my songs in terms of both production and the gear, so I thought it would be a pretty good place to start in terms of revealing my process and what I use to produce music. But despite all of that, there's still quite a bit to cover, so I'm going to try to move fairly quickly through everything. But if you have any questions, feel free to write them in the comment section, and I'm more than happy to get back to you. With all of that out of the way, let's talk about instruments. We can start bottom up with the drums. The drums were recorded by finger drumming on my Novation Launchpad X. The bass was recorded on my Sire Marcus Miller M2, second generation. For the guitar, I used my Fender Mexican-made Player Stratocaster. All the keys and synths were played on my Native Instruments Complete Control A49 MIDI controller. The bass and guitar were both recorded direct in using my Universal Audio Volt 476p. As far as percussion is concerned, I used this shaker. The shaker was recorded using my Audio-Technica AT2035 condenser microphone, and I think that pretty much covers all the physical gear I used for this song. Everything else was done in Ableton using different plugins and virtual instruments, and I'll talk about each one of those later on in the video. Something to note is that I'm not sponsored by anyone and there's no affiliate links or anything. I purchased with my own money every bit of gear and every plugin shown in this video, and any of the opinions I state are genuinely my opinions. It's gear I quite like and I use often and I'm excited about, and I just want to share it with you because I like it. Hey, it's Editing Me here. While I was editing the video, I realized that I lost a lot of my audio, so some of the audio is going to be camera quality and some audio is going to be microphone quality, so I apologize in advance. I'll try to not lose my audio in the future, but kind of is what it is, so thanks for your patience. Let's talk about drum sounds. As far as the sound selection is concerned, I was using this Euro tree kit. This is from Circle Drum Sounds, and it's specifically from a pack called Circle's Dead 1975. It's a really good pack. I really like it. It sounds really dead, which is kind of what they were going for. And this is what it sounds like. The reason I chose this specific drum kit is because I like the deadness of it, but I also think it has a bit of a lo-fi type quality that goes really well with the type of song that I wanted to put together. And as I said in my previous video, I wanted this song to have a bit of a lo-fi quality to it, and I think this drum kit does a really good job at that. Instead of a snare, I've been using the side stick. Other than that, it's pretty straightforward. A little bit too straightforward. So what I've done is I wanted to layer up some extra kicks. It's a pretty sparse arrangement, so I thought that there was a lot of space for a big kick. I wanted it to turn into this sort of a heartbeat, and I felt that the kick from the Euro tree just wasn't giving me everything that I wanted. As far as kicks, I experimented with this one. Also this one, which is just an 808, and this thud 808. And both of them layered together sound like this. And without. As you can hear, it adds quite a bit more thickness and it removes a little bit of the clickiness by doing nothing other than just layering another kick on top of it. Now, as far as the side stick was concerned, I decided to layer up a clap on top of that. And these are the drums without. and these are with. The reason I decided to go for this specific bass as opposed to any of my other two basses, which are a P bass and a jazz bass, is because of the humbucker pickups. The humbucker pickups compared to the single coil pickups I have on my P or my J give the bass tone a little bit more thickness, a little bit more roundness, and I felt that that contributed to the vibe of the song better than the other pickups. Something else that sort of helps the bass as well is the fact that the strings are kind of old on it. They're duller, they're not as punchy. As far as the pickups are concerned, the bass has a blend knob, usually instead of having it straight in the middle, which means that both pickups are equally as loud. I tend to prefer the neck pickup a little bit louder and the bridge pickup a little bit quieter. It really just depends on what fits better, and this is what I found fit better in this context. Alright, let's talk about bass. What I typically do with my bass, and it's something I learned from Produce Like a Pro and Warren Hewitt, is I split the same DI signal in three. One of those layers is going to be the lower part of the bass, the low end. The second one is going to be the high end, and then I have a third track where I just add a little bit of grit and then I dial that in to taste. And that's exactly what I've done here. This is what the DI sounds like. And what I've done for the low end is I rolled off everything under 210 Hertz. It's just a low, thick, bassy sort of bass sound. What I've done after that is I added this LA2A on top of that to compress it. And as you can tell, it affects the tone of the bass a little bit as well. And it makes it quite a bit thicker. Obviously, it also adds a little bit of volume. I know there's a lot of mixing tips out there where you shouldn't be doing any volume increases with your plugins. I decided to ignore that. So last in the chain is this Pultec EQ from Universal Audio, where I'm using the bass girth setup. And what that does is adds girth to the bass. Very similar to that is what I've done with the high. This time around, everything under 210 Hertz has been cut off. I added this 1176 where I use the for everything setting. And obviously there's a volume increase, but beyond that, it also gives it a bit more attack and it makes the high end a little bit more aggressive. This is the two of them together. The last thing I've done to the bass is I added a little bit of grit, which was achieved by doing a few different things. First of all, I removed everything under 200 Hertz, and I also boosted 3K over here just a tiny bit. And on top of that, I added this 1176. And I've also used the for everything setting on the 1176. And last in the chain is this saturator. And everything together sounds like this. As I said, the guitar I'm using is my Fender Stratocaster. The reason I chose this guitar over any of my other guitars is because, to be honest, I've not been using it for a little while and I kind of missed playing it, so I figured I'm just gonna use that. And also, it's a Strat. You can fit the Strat on most any track. I don't think it's my favorite guitar type. I'm much more of a telly guy, but I tried the telly on this song and it just didn't sound quite right. I tried the Jazzmaster, didn't sound quite right, and the Stratocaster just slotted right in. As I previously said, there's the David Gilmour mod on the guitar, and the lead guitar is using the neck and the bridge pickup on their own, which is a configuration that you can't get with the traditional wiring. Whereas the other guitars, I literally just kind of went around and tried out everything until I found whatever felt right. Let's talk about the lead guitar. The lead guitar is, to an extent, carrying the track, and the rhythm guitars are just there for a little bit of filler. Let's have a listen to the main guitar tone. There are two different guitars stacked on top of each other. They're both straight down the middle. I've done this because I wanted to thicken up the lead guitar tone a little bit by adding a second guitar in. This is what the main lead guitar sounds like. And this is what it sounds like with the double. The tones are also quite different, and I wanted the second guitar to not only bring in a bit of thickness, but also cut through the mix a little bit more as well. As far as the plugins that I'm using the Morgan Amp Suite, and I'm also using the Replica XT from Native Instruments. So the Neural DSP Morgan Amp is one of my favorite amp sims ever. And I know that I was saying that the Corey Wong Archetype plugin is what inspired me to write the song in the first place. However, by the time I decided to take the demo further and actually turn it into a track, the Morgan Amp Suite came out, and I figured, well, this seems to be doing everything that I want from an amp sim and just sounds more up my alley, so I decided to buy this one instead. Anyway, as far as the amp is concerned, I use the PR12. As you can see, the reverb is pretty much switched all the way off. Dwell, however, is maxed out, which adds a bit of ambience to the sound. I boosted the bass just a tiny bit, and I cut some of the treble, and the amp tone on its own sounds like this. As you can hear, it's a pretty sparkly, jangly type of guitar tone. I decided to thicken that up a little bit with the OD tune, with just a smidge of gain, with some bass cut, and with the treble cut a little bit too, and this is what that sounds like. Just drives the amp a little bit more, and I think it thickens out the pretty thinnish sounding Stratocaster. As far as the cab is concerned, I used two mics. I used the Ribbon 121, and I also used the Dynamic 57, which is a pretty classic combination. Nothing too fancy there. The EQ section is doing a little bit of stuff. I'm rolling off everything under 80 Hz, and I also cut everything in the 65 Hz band. I rolled off 16K. Other than that, I just tweaked everything to taste. This is what it sounds without and with. As far as the reverb is concerned, I'm using the built-in reverb. As you can see, I've rolled off some of the lows and some of the highs. The mix is about 10 o'clock, so is a pre-delay, and the decay is closer to 11-ish. Last but not least, I added the Replica XT from Native Instruments using the tape setting and a ping-pong delay effect. I use a quarter note on the left, and I use the dotted quarter on the right. So I think the delay does a whole lot for the guitar tone. It brings in a lot of space, it brings in a lot of atmosphere, and this is what I absolutely loved about what the Corey Wong plugin was doing. It was using a ping pong delay, and it just gave this sort of spaciness and openness to the sound that I really loved. Next up, let's talk about the guitar double. For it, I'm using the Morgan Am Suite yet again. However, this time around I'm using the AC20, which has a bit more bite to it than the PR12. I'm not using any of the pedals, and the amp itself sounds like this. And as you can hear, it has quite a bit more grit than the PR12. When it comes to the cab, I was using a Dynamic 57 and a Condenser 414, and I can't really say that I was using those for a specific reason. That's just what sounded good to my ears. Next up, let's have a look at the EQ. This time around, I rolled off a lot more of the lows, so I rolled everything under 239, and everything else, again, is to taste. As you can see, I decided to cut some of the low end and some of the mids, and I boosted a little bit more in the top end area. So this is what it sounds like. Reverb is fairly similar to the reverb that I was using on the other guitar. Next up in the chain is a little bit of chorus, setting 1 on the Studio D chorus by Universal Audio. This widens the sound, but it also makes it a little bit gentler and not as pokey. And to that I added the dirty tape from Softtube using a middle of the road type of drive setting and with a more clean than worn out tape setting. And that smooths out the guitar quite a bit. This is what both guitars sound together. Next up, let's have a listen to the rhythm guitars. What I wanted from the rhythm guitars was to pan them hard left, hard right, and I wanted them to just add a little bit of atmosphere and texture to the sound. This is what the rhythm guitar on the right sounds like on its own. For this guitar, I'm using the Morgan Am Suite again. I'm using the PR12 with the settings, cutting some of the bass, boosting some of the treble, no reverb, and just a smidge of dwell. I didn't use any of the pedals, and I'm using a ribbon and the Dynamic 57 combination yet again, and this is what it sounds like without any bells or whistles. And this is what it sounds like with the EQ section switched on. And on its own, it sounds a little bit pokey and it kind of stabs at you. However, by giving it a bit of delay and a little bit of reverb, it turns into this. Sounds like it's further back, it's a lot more spacey, and it feels like it's not as jarring as it was sounding without any of the reverb or the delay on. To that, I added the dirty tape from Softtube. However, this time around, I added a setting that has more flutter in it, although the drive is pretty much similar to what it was on the second lead guitar. And as you can hear, this smooths out the sound a whole lot. And the flutter adds a little bit of movement, a little bit of instability, ethereal kind of quality to this. Let's have a listen to the second rhythm guitar on its own. As you can hear, this sounds like it's further back in space. And as far as the tone is concerned, I don't have any pedals on. I'm using the PR12 again. Very similar settings to what I had on the other guitar. Same ribbon 121 and dynamic 57 combination. And the EQ curve is a little bit different. As you can see, I'm pushing a lot more mids, whereas on the other one I was pushing a little bit more of the higher end. I'm not using any delay, however I'm using a significant amount of reverb. This is it without any reverb. If anything, it's a pretty unpleasant sound. And this is it without any EQ. Which doesn't specifically help it either. However, as soon as you kick in the reverb, it gives a lot more of the atmosphere that I was looking for. I added the dirty tape from Softtube yet again. This time around I really cranked the dirt on it, and I removed a little bit of the drive compared to the other settings that I've been using, and this is adding it a whole lot of movement, as you can hear. If anything, it makes it sound and feel a little bit wonky. But I felt that that sort of helps with the meditative type of quality that I was after. And I also rolled off a tiny bit of the high end with a shelf because it felt like it was a little bit too pokey in the mix. And it also pushes it a little bit further back in space as well. And this is what all the guitars sound like together, including the rhythm and the lead guitars. Up next, let's talk about synths. I have 4 different types of synths / keys going on. Let's have a look at the first one, which is this synth bass over here. For it, I'm using this UAD Polymax synth. I started off with the Son of Sub preset, and then I just tweaked stuff until I found something that I really liked. Next up, let's have a look at keys. I have keys panned fairly hard left and right. The keys on the right are using the hybrid keys from Native Instruments, with an ambient piano on the left sample and the muted clav on the right, with the balance bang on in the middle, and it sounds like this. As you can hear, there's a fair bit of movement in there, made by the chorus and the flanger. The warmth is dialed up fairly high. On the left-hand side, we have something very similar. We have the hybrid keys again, and it sounds like this. Same sort of situation going on here with 2 different samples that are merged together. Just some nice faraway keys, and both of them together sound like this. And with the added bass, we have this. Last on the list, we have this last synth that sounds like this. And this synth really just brings in a little bit of texture. In the final mix, you can barely hear it, but you feel when it's there, and you feel something's missing when it's not. For it, I'm using the Opal morphing synth from Universal Audio. I've been using this Angels in the Distance preset for it. I tweaked some stuff, but I kept going back to the preset as it was. And with everything switched on, we have this. So as I said, just a little bit of atmosphere, a little bit of rhythmic movement, and the bass just thickens up the actual bass a tiny bit and gives a little bit more low-end goodness to the song. Last but not least, I want to talk about percussion. We have this tambourine, we have this pandeiro, and we also have the shaker. The shaker doesn't really do anything too interesting apart from adding a little bit of rhythmic interest to the song. The shaker sounds like this. And then it builds up a little bit towards the end. And that's pretty much it. Next up we have the pandeiro. It's just a loop that I found in Ableton that I pitched down by 2 semitones, and it sounds like this. And lastly we have the tambourine. What a tambourine does is it mimics the snare drum, and it just helps to thicken the snare drum a little bit. So let's listen to the tambourine on its own. And together with the snare and the clap, it sounds like this. And in the context of the whole song. And without. And with. As you can see, it just helps reinforce the snare a little bit, and it doesn't do too much beyond that. That's it for the instrument choice and sound selection, and I'll see you in part 3 for some of the mixing decisions I made. Alright, that pretty much covers everything for this video. If you're interested in more music-related content like this video, in which I talk about album covers and what makes a good album cover in the digital world, please consider subscribing, and until next time, have a good one.